How is everybody doing? Strength Chat episode 117, and today I've got a very special guest for you. Today I'm joined by a weightlifting and powerlifting coach with over 2 decades of experience, having coached national and world record holders. Today I am joined by Max Aita. How are you doing?
Doing well. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. What have you been up to? What's been happening in your world?
Outside of the quarantine stuff, just mostly been doing some regular coaching. Just finished up kind of the Olympic qualification process, although they're delayed, and I think that's going to change. That whole thing is going to be totally different now. I'm not really sure. I think everyone's kind of waiting to hear how that all shakes down.
Yeah.
It may have no impact on anybody. It may be a kind of an upset or a game changer for some. So I guess we're kind of waiting to see on that.
Yeah.
But as far as training stuff and that kind of thing, it's been wrapping up that quad, and now it's kind of making these long-term plans for the people I have for the next quad and seeing who's gonna go where, what are they gonna do, what's the plan.
Yeah, because I saw that the Olympics have now been, their dates have been rearranged. Are you sort of putting plans in place for the build up for that and creating more content for Juggernaut?
Yeah, I mean, right now because for me personally as a coach, I'm a coach first, and the education side of things is like a secondary piece. Where Juggernaut started with Chad started Juggernaut as solely an education-based kind of company. It's free education, giving out information, and the coaching stuff came, a little later. I mean, obviously he was a coach and he's got clients and whatnot, but it's like the company itself is more of an information company, and that's never been my forte.
Yeah.
So, a lot of times, as these quads have gone on and big competitions, I get so wrapped up in coaching and doing those things that I don't do as much of the content education stuff as I would, or as I should. So now, with that kind of all coming back around and kind of slowing down, it's been my goal to sort of build out more of that stuff and produce more of those things.
Yeah.
With the weightlifting AI stuff kind of really still in beta form, for me, the goal is to get that up and running to a level of really high proficiency and being where I want it to be as a product and as an actual usable software kind of platform. So building those things up is the biggest thing, and then just kind of creating some more content and more information to kind of flesh out the menu of weightlifting content that we have.
Yeah, nice. So with the obviously with the situation as it is now, has your coaching style changed as much by watching videos of people lifting, or rather than coaching in person? Has it changed too much from the coaching service that you've provided, or?
I did before this. I mean, I was doing everybody was remote. I only have one athlete that's on the sort of international level that lives near me. And so it hasn't changed anything from my coaching style because I've already done everything remotely.
Yeah.
But it has put a different level of, I guess, seriousness on the whole remote coaching of clients, like gym people, and kind of getting them into a different mode where they're seeing, hey, this is a viable option. I think before, remote coaching for a lot of people, if they had a gym, seemed like, what's the point? I can get coaching in person. But now with this kind of forcing it, I think it's kind of stepped everyone up, because now the whole industry is going to be doing this basically, and so it's you got to be that much more in your game. So I think it's kind of been one of those not a wake up call because we're already doing it, but okay, we have to really push this and do our absolute best to keep this business alive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for people or coaches who have already done sort of some remote coaching or online coaching, to get their service refined a little bit more and offer something a little bit different, because I think there is certain things, like I know for me with the clients that I'm working with, I've probably spoken to them probably twice as much as what probably I
Yeah.
would have when it was open, because I would expect to see them in the gym, whereas now I'm not seeing
Right.
as much. And because I'm not in the gym and going from session into session, I've got a lot more time that I can, dedicate to it a little bit more, which I think is only going to be a benefit and lay good habits for when all of this is sort of like blown over and the gyms are open, we're back to normal.
Yeah.
For everyone listening, obviously, I've followed the work that you've done through Juggernaut. But for everyone listening who might not know your background, how you got into coaching and how you've developed through your coaching career, just want to give a little bit of a background to yourself?
Yeah. When I was like 12 years old, I saw the 96 Olympics on TV, and I was just totally enamored with weightlifting, and that's like what I wanted to do and be. And so I just started down this path of, I'm going to become a weightlifter, and I'm going to become, I'm going to go to the Olympics. And, fast forward many years and not enough weight lifted and, too many big injuries, and I'm out of the sport, and I basically, couldn't do it as an athlete. And so I transitioned into coaching. And at the time, about probably like 2007, or 2008, 2009, I basically got to this point where I was like, okay, I have to commit to coaching because I can't compete. And I started, just working with people, doing what I had done as an athlete. And my whole history kind of came from the Bulgarian system and this sort of, extreme methodology. And when you're first starting, you use and do what you know or have been doing or what you're confident with. And I always knew deep down, like, this is probably not the best way to do this. But sometimes it's hard to separate your familiarity with this sort of justification, like, oh, well, it worked here, it worked there, like, so I don't want to abandon it. But basically, like, getting poor results after a while forced me to have to rethink things. And I started, going back to what I knew and read and learning things, and kind of develop my own system, based on logic and principles, and eventually kind of just, transition that into what I do now with people. I think getting involved with Chad and Juggernaut in 2016 was a huge change and a huge sort of learning experience for me to have been in an environment like that, where, they were more about the education stuff and teaching, and it forced me to have to learn more and adapt my methods and style with, a bigger picture kind of thing. Like, how do I explain what I'm doing to regular people or to new people? If I can't explain it, maybe I don't know it that well. And so, that process was really a catalyst for me in terms of really solidifying a better understanding of how I do things. And then, just in general, the philosophical, point of view that Chad has and all of Juggernaut has, Mike Israel, all these guys, I really love the idea of, like, principle-based approaches, where you have these underlying fundamental principles that all things grow from. And that kind of created a really big framework for how I view coaching and how I do those things now.
Yeah, it's interesting saying there about, looking at the content side of things, because I know through the academy side of things at the gym that I work in, I ended up doing one of my first sort of online seminars, I think you'd call it. And in my head, I think, oh yeah, I know what I'm talking about. But then sometimes you can go a little bit too in depth, or how I maybe put it across, other people don't understand.
Yeah.
So, I can see where you're coming from, that having your own sort of style, if you like, and then putting that across for maybe easily digestible information, if you like. Obviously, with quite a lot of experience and having taken athletes to quite a lot of competitions, who's sort of been your biggest, and you mentioned there about the sort of Bulgarian method, who's been sort of your biggest influences on your coaching style and programming, and how have you refined it over time?
Probably from a coaching style, like the way I coach people, I would say some of my biggest influences, my first coach, Steve Goff, was a really hard-headed ex-cop, Marine, Vietnam vet. Like, he was legit the most intense person I've ever met in my life. Um, and I took a lot of that experience with me. And, there's some things that I drew from that where it's like, a lot of times people they can be, let's say, softer than they need to be. And you know, so I took a lot of that as like, there's this perspective you have to have that he didn't take himself too seriously, and he was all about like pushing yourself to be as good as you can be. And from a coaching style perspective, I always think that's got to be the foundation of what you do. The other side of that coin, though, is that the other people I've always kind of drawn inspiration from were much more methodical. Or Shaco, Chad, just sort of like, you have to have this methodical intellectual approach, but at the same side, if you have to flip on the switch and be a savage, then that has to be there. So it's my style is trying to balance this thing where we want people to be aggressive, and we want, as coaches, to have to hold them back so that they're not, we don't want to have a coach who's just motivation, who's just rah barking orders and pushing people, because that can easily go the wrong direction. It can easily go too far and end up getting someone nowhere and just becoming this, like, this wasteful endeavor. But at the same time, you have to have some of that, and then you have to temper it with the other side of like, hey, what's the logical approach? What's good programming? What's smart decision making? So that you have this nice sort of midway point where you're, hey, we're holding you back as an athlete. You should be raring to go. You should be asking us for more and to push and to do these things, and we hold you back so that when we do have that chance to go forward, it's there. The fight is there in these people. And then, the other side is, hey, like, let's be intelligent about our programming. Let's push to make results and progress, but do it in a way that makes sense. Do it in a way that's sustainable, that's logical. And that's with my coaching style, that's the sort of thing I try to cultivate. I want people to be in that zone where they're comfortable, they're making progress, they're feeling good, but they're chomping at the bit to get there.
Do you find that, because obviously every coach has their own sort of style of how they put themselves across. Do you think that a certain, as you've developed as a coach, that certain types of athletes have gravitated towards you, or certain styles of lifters?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I would say that there's probably a lot more women coaches or women athletes that I coach. And that's changed a lot in the last year or so, but there's definitely a lot more females that gravitate toward me. And I think one of the reasons is because, in general, what I've noticed about those women is they are extremely self-motivated, way more so than the men. The men are generally not nearly as self-motivated as a whole. Women will, if you say, hey, you got to do this workout and it's going to take you 6 hours and you'll be in the gym till midnight, most of the women on the team would just go ahead and do it. And they wouldn't think twice. They'd never question it.
Yeah.
This is what you have to do to get better. A lot of the men don't have that mentality. And I think that kind of thing is the thing that those type of people gravitate to this style of coaching, where it's hey, this is what you have to do to get better. And there's the opportunity. I'm presenting it to you. Go for it. Take it. Some people have a different with a different style, or maybe need that push, are not gonna do well there, because they're never gonna get that raw motivation kind of thing.
Why do you think there is that much of a difference? What do you think that stems from?
I think it's just personalities. Some people are super motivated and they're extremely. I mean, some of the most talented people I've ever seen and worked with were not by any means the most motivated, and the opposite. Some of the most motivated people were very much did not have the tools they needed to get better. And I think it's just kind of the cliche kind of thing, or a personality trait, where people are, some just have that intrinsic, like, they decide they want something, and it doesn't matter what gets in the way, they're going to find a way to get to it. And others just they just don't have that.
Yeah, with the because there's the I do agree, and why I asked that question is I find that myself with the clients that I work with, because I think the coach athlete relationship obviously is really really important, and I have found that there is a certain type of athlete or client that will gravitate toward a coach. Have you ever
Yeah.
found it, or have you had any experience with athletes that you've worked with where they might have come in with sort of the wrong mindset, and it's sort of they've turned into and changed their mindset around, if you like, because there is that saying where you either join a culture or become part of a culture. Have you had an experience with that where athletes will change and come round to your sort of idea, if you like?
That's a good question. I had not thought about that, but there's probably some people that have done that. Um, I think sometimes, I don't know if I've seen that particular thing where people will join and they had one mentality and they changed it a lot. A little bit where maybe it's more of like their philosophy on training programs changes. Maybe they had a system that was way more intense and they switched to something that we do where it's a little bit less intense, and that shift kind of, they adopt that and they join in. But from a strictly personality point, like, I don't think I've ever had anyone come in that was like not a highly motivated individual and then become that, or vice versa. Um, but it is an interesting thought. I had not actually kind of put that into my mind there.
Yeah. What I ask is, and you sort of touched on it a little bit there, is that I know that different athletes can change coaches, as they maybe progress or are wanting to go to the next level. And do you think the biggest changes how athletes will come across and maybe highlight the biggest changes is through the programming, not necessarily the coaching?
Yeah. I think there's this kind of, like, if you imagine like a Venn diagram, right, where like success is in the middle, or maybe not success, but like the sort of sweet spot of like where these different things converge is what you're looking for. And it's like, the training program is both the be all and end all and completely irrelevant. The coaching is both absolutely everything and means nothing at the same time. And the athlete, the talent and the work ethic is both critical and totally unimportant. So it's like, it all is this context of how much these things overlap. A really not talented person with excellent coaching and incredible training program and a great environment, could realize the absolute best performances, that are possible. And any other situation is the case there. It's like, a great program and a great athlete, but shitty coaching could easily be someone going nowhere. And so it's like this sort of quagmire of like, you're trying to balance these things, and at the same time, this is something I believe, is that each one of those individual components influences the others.
Yeah.
The coaching personality and coaching style hugely influence the training program. If you're a really like motivational kind of go hard, push people coach, you're probably going to have a training program that reflects that, and you're going to draw people in that enjoy that. So it's like these things all go hand in hand. If you were to mix and match those things and take a really like aggressive, intense program and pair it with a really late, kind of mellow, not super aggressive coach, and a, really, super driven athlete, you might get a weird result. You might get a poor result. So it's like they all influence each other. And the key, I think, to making it work is that you understand the influences between those things: the athlete, the environment, the program, the coaching, and you balance them in a way that, one thing complements the other, but also is not contradictory to it.
Yeah. Do you think that's why, just on a little bit of a tangent, that's why as athletes are wanting to progress and reach the next level, that's why they'll maybe look for the next step in the level of coaching or the coach that they're working with?
Yeah, I think people generally go from one program or one coach. This happens a lot with, like, the lower the level of the athlete, the more often they seem to switch. And I think that what you see, and this is just purely anecdotal and may not be true, but athletes that are looking for the next thing, the next step, they plateau in their capabilities. They plateau, quicker than other people, because I think what happens is when you move from coach to coach, your assumption is that one coach has a better recipe than another. And you see it as like, okay, you know, it's the recipe, it's the situation. I'm looking for the right one, the best one. But the reality is that the people that stick with one coach for a long time generally improve, because at some point, if the coach is competent, the coach is going to start improving.
Mhm.
And both parties have to grow, and all things have to grow. And if things are allowed to grow together, you're going to see better results long term, because the coach is going to eventually, if the coach doesn't change, that's just, they're not going to, that's not a great coach. But any coach that's decent is going to start adapting, right? They're going to start learning and improving, and hey, it's been a few months or training cycles with no PRs. We have to do things differently. They have to be driven. And so people that are looking for that better scenario or trying to upgrade a coach or a system often miss that point, that it's a relationship and it's a process that has to grow from the athlete and the coach, and the relationship has to grow together. A lot of times you see athletes that move up the ranks with one coach, and the coach becomes better and better as time goes on. It's not just one athlete they have that keeps getting better, it's that their whole club and system starts to grow, and you start seeing more success, more success, more success.
Yeah.
Obviously there's other scenarios too, where a coach doesn't improve as a coach, but they become a better recruiter or a better, grabbing the right people, which is a strategy, but it's still the idea of growth. They're still changing and improving as time goes on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the same, when you're talking about people that are wanting to get stronger or increase muscle mass. One of the things is just don't program hop. Let's try and see
Right,
it through.
right.
Let's try and have some consistency from there, because I do think, especially if you've not worked with an athlete or a client before, it takes a little bit of a while for that relationship to
Yeah.
build. And then once that sort of trust is embedded, then the gateway can open for a little bit more communication, and you can both work together for a plan going forward.
Yeah.
Touching on the programming side of things, how have you changed your programming or your templates as you have progressed as a coach, or where have you drawn sort of your influences from? Obviously, again, you've mentioned the Bulgarian side of things.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started, like I said, a lot of what I did was what I had done, and I gave people the same kind of things I did. And it was really like a super narrow scope of exercises with a super narrow application of training methods, like reps and sets. And, so we covered, the bases that we needed to get better, but it didn't really do an adequate job of supporting all people that came into that system. People that could do it did okay. People that couldn't do it did terrible. And so my evolution of coaching really went from and I think this is the way that most coaches go about things. When you're young and you're new, you start with the things that are tangible and easy to grasp, and that's always the exercises.
Yeah.
Oh, this exercise is cool and that one's neat, and I want to try goblet squats, and I want to try safety squats. I want to do, this weird bench press variation and bands and chains and cool, exciting things that are tangible, that are easy to do. Then you start to realize, well, the exercises are not as relevant as I thought. They're not they're not as big a cog in the wheel as I had thought before, or the machine. So then the next stage is, okay, it's all about the template, the structure of the program. It's like, okay, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we squat 3 times a week, or we do, cleans twice a week, or we do bench press 4 times a week, or whatever it is, the named programs out there, the 5-3-1s, the Juggernaut method, the cube method, the whatever million other named workout programs that exist. And that's the second level of like this sort of learning process. Okay, well, those are great, but they're really just programs. They don't apply to every person. They don't work well within that framework for every single person. And it's really just a great collection of approximations for people. So the next level of sort of, development there is like the idea of a system. So then once you get past programs and you look into systems, you're like, oh, okay, it's all about these systems. It's like the Bulgarian system or the Russian system. It's this collection of programs and collection of exercises, collection of methods that are put together in this way that like, oh, we're doing these systems or that system. And systems are great because they allow for a little more expansive, the coverage for athletes. You can get successful training for a lot of different types of athletes. Yeah. But ultimately, the problem with systems is that they're, again, like programs, they're just more elaborate versions of templates and programs. And so once I got past that, once, anyone gets past the systems idea, you move into this place where you base things on principles. And principles is sort of the most fundamental aspect of programming. And as a coach, moving past systems and understanding how principles can be applied. And principles are basically just fundamental universal truths about the training process, right? Using those principles to build programs and to build systems is what gives you the power. It kind of gives you the keys to the kingdom. You can do anything with principles. You can build any program and you can make it perfectly dialed in for any athlete. And that's where the sort of progression from beginner coach, new guy, me, to, where I'm at now, which is just a glorified beginner that thinks he's better than he is. You get to that point where, okay, like now I can look at any program and break that program down into its principles and quantify any program written by any person within the principles, right? We can look at the 5-3-1 program and break it down by the principles, the scientific principles that it fundamentally draws from: specificity, overload, fatigue management, stimulus recovery adaptation, variation, phase potentiation, individual differences. And anyone who's read the Juggernaut books and seen any Juggernaut stuff, we always reference these principles. But if we were to look at any program, break it down by principles, we could compare it to any other program. And that's the kind of tool that you need as a coach to be able to understand, is my program good? Are my training systems and programs good? How do they apply to, how do they break down by principle? And then you can grade them and say, oh yeah, my programs are shit because I'm missing these 4 principles, are just not accounted for very well in this program. I could do better with this aspect or that aspect, and make those changes. And that's the kind of state you have to be in to become a really great coach, is to base all of your training on principles, not just exercises, not just programs, not just systems. Use these fundamentals to do it.
I suppose as well, like what you're saying there about refining and going through those phases of developing as a coach. I suppose you do have to make mistakes and actually have the maybe confidence, if you like, to say, yeah, actually I'm struggling with this bit, so I'm gonna learn a little bit more or develop that a little bit more, because I know for me, when I first started out, I wanted to throw everything into a program. I was like, yeah, this will be awesome. Like what you mentioned about the chains and the bands. Yep. Whereas actually, as I've probably progressed as a coach, there's probably not as much fancy and crazy stuff in there, but it's more about, like what you mentioned, working on those principles and changing the overload or the specificity and working it through that.
Exactly.
Obviously, at the start, you mentioned about being really interested in the weightlifting side of things, and obviously you've taken quite a lot of athletes to the top level on weightlifting. How has it sort of come about with the powerlifting side of programming as well? Have you balanced that both, or is that something that was just sort of in the background?
No, so after I got injured as a weightlifter, I kind of transitioned and did some powerlifting, and I really liked it. It was enjoyable. But after a certain point in time as a competitor, powerlifting becomes a little bit boring. And really, like any sport with a barbell, is going to become boring if you don't, continually improve and stay relevant and competitive, because eventually you're just going and doing the same things over and over again. And I obviously was, when I first did my first meet, I squatted not first, but one of my first meets, I squatted 705 raw. And that was a really big squat at the time. And now, nobody even would give a shit about a 700-pound squat. When it wraps too, it's meaningless, I mean, people are doing that all over the place. So with powerlifting, it was a passion for me because I enjoyed doing it. I really loved I loved a couple things about it. The training was a lot of fun. It was very different than weightlifting. It was not nearly as stressful mentally. You didn't have to get psyched up to do lifts. You just train and get better. And, as time went on, I started moving into coaching that more. I really enjoy coaching the powerlifters because it's a lot of fun from a perspective of this continual improvement and progress that gets made, where you're not in this place with weightlifting. You could train for months and months and make 2 kilo PR. And, it's way more up and down emotionally. With powerlifting, it's much more steady and much more linear from a growth standpoint in the sport. But it's always been there. It's funny because a lot of people in powerlifting knew me as a weightlifting guy, and weightlifting people know that I did powerlifting, and sometimes they'll kind of equate it or ask if I still do it. But I would say probably half of my athletes do powerlifting, as are solely powerlifters. Then there's some people that kind of cross over in the middle where they're doing weightlifting and powerlifting, and most notably Meg Scanlon, who's world record holder in powerlifting, and actually a very, very good weightlifter nationally in the U.S. So it's always been there. It's always important to me. I really enjoy it. My wife does powerlifting and is very successful. Was a Masters world champion. It's there. It's kind of funny because those two worlds rarely collide.
Yeah.
And I think that Juggernaut is Juggernaut's funny because Juggernaut is the one thing that's really sits in the middle of those two worlds. Really high level powerlifting. I mean, Marissa, Meg, Chris Dunsmore, Forberg, my wife, a lot of, Andy Quayle, really good powerlifting, and then fantastic weightlifting as well.
Yeah.
We've had 5 American record holders come out of Juggernaut in weightlifting, which is, it's a big deal to break an American record in weightlifting. Multiple world team members, multiple Pan Am team members, plenty of national champions and medalist stuff. So you have this weird world where they're both hugely successful, but I don't know how much people see it as Juggernaut is this powerhouse in both sports, more as it's a powerlifting company that has powerlifters or whatever. So it's funny to me that those worlds rarely, it's like oil and water. They just don't mix it much, despite there being tons of crossover that could happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was, part of one of the reasons why, I wanted to have you as a guest on the podcast to pick your brains, because I liken it a little bit to over in the UK, rugby union and rugby league. They're both rugbies,
right?
But two slightly different, different ideas behind it. And I kind of wanted just to sort of pick your brains in terms of what have you found having a foot in both camps, if you like, the similarities that you would use in terms of the programming side of things and how you might lay out a program, and what sort of the biggest differences, if you like. Because I do think that through I always try and anything that I learn or read or listen to, how can I use that? How can I use that with the clients that I'm working with, or implement that within my coaching? What have you found from having a foot in both camps?
Yeah. I would say that, again, going back to the principles, once you start building programming around principles, it becomes very clear what works for both sports, what is the same. The type of training that goes into both sports is different in the content, but not in the structure.
Right.
So the exercises you do for weightlifting are different than powerlifting. You have snatches and clean jerks versus, bench presses. Uh, but the structure of how you organize that, the type of periodization, do you have a linear block periodization? Do you have concurrent periodization? Do you have some kind of, how do you manage fatigue? All these things are the same. It's just the dose of those things for each athlete. So they're conducive to do together. They can be done together fine. Obviously, you have like super total people and those programs that we have, but at the same time, there's definite like contradictions, right? The better you become at powerlifting, the qualities you develop there are generally going to negatively impact weightlifting training to a point. So, you know, one thing you have to understand is like while powerlifting, it's always, you can do more, a little more volume, more work. The technical components and the speed components don't necessarily degrade like they would in weightlifting. Whereas with weightlifting, there's just a point in any training session or any training volume, that you just stop being productive. If you've got, 4 or 5 sets of triples in the snatch for the day, 15 sets of triples that day is not going to help you, right? Or an extra set or two is going to degrade your technique enough to make that session not productive. So the sort of break points in weightlifting are much earlier than they are in powerlifting. So you might have people do volumes that are extreme in powerlifting, 6, 8 sets of 10 or something like that in a workout, 10 sets or something of squats. Whereas in weightlifting, you would just not have that because those break points are so much earlier. And the threshold for development is a little higher. So higher intensities in weightlifting, 85, 90, 95% lifts in the statue clean jerk regularly. Combining those two things and making it work is sort of this, art form, but sort of this creative process of like, hey, how do I manage these things well? But from a principle standpoint, the same stuff works for everything. It's just, how do what are the intricacies of each sport? What do they require? And how do we plan those out?
Do you find there, obviously, when you're mentioning there about yeah, the more you push one, the other might drop down. Do you find that actually people will naturally gravitate to one or the other, and it's very few people that sort of sit in the middle, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say there's 3 types of athletes. There's like the pure weightlifters, there's the pure powerlifters, and then there's the super total people. And obviously anyone can be anything. You can do whatever you want. You could be a powerlifter or a weightlifter or both, or, it's a choice. There's people that are, I would say, like hardwired or built. Yeah, I don't know what the right word is, but there's people that definitely fit into one of those boxes and definitely don't fit into the other box.
Yeah.
In powerlifting, from a morphological standpoint, the way their bodies are built, different leverages work really well in powerlifting and they don't work as well in weightlifting. And then vice versa, right? Some really short arm, long torso, short leg person will generally be a much better weightlifter, but they can be a great powerlifter as well. But it's like, you might have somebody who sort of fits that bill a little better. And then, the opposite is someone with long arms and short back is going to be an incredible deadlifter. And so, they might be more suited to that. But from a personality standpoint too, weightlifters are probably a little bit more extrovert than powerlifters. And generally, it's going to be a little bit more athletic type people. Because the sport is just a little more athletic. There's more speed component, there's more technical component. Both types of athletes are equally diversified from a standpoint of all other things. But I would say there's definite like personality traits and things and some anatomical things that just suit people to pick one or the other. And the people in the middle are always insane. The super total people are always kind of crazy, or just like freakishly talented, or both, right? Like Meg is a great example of someone who's extremely talented and totally insane. Like the amount of training she does and can do is just ridiculous. And then James Townsend, who does both, is, probably the opposite end of that spectrum for the amount of training he can do. Meg is a 63 kilo weightlifter, powerlifter, who's female, who used to be a triathlete. James Townsend is a former 100-meter, I think he had like a 10-300-meter time, 45-inch vertical jump, does like 3 reps and he's gassed out by the 3rd rep. So total opposite end of the spectrum, from a genetic standpoint, but both do well because she can train a ton and he's so powerful and strong. He does well in both. So it's this interesting, like those people in the middle that are really successful are generally freakish in that they have some predisposition to training a ton, or they have some, phenomenal level of ability.
Do you think that just sort of building on what you've said there? Obviously, with weightlifting, some of the lifts, like what you mentioned there, can be seen in an athletic background, or potentially people can think that they're used in sort of strength conditioning and that sort of stuff. Do you think people are sometimes maybe put off by weightlifting because of the skill component of it, and it's quite athletic side of things, and maybe people are pushed more towards the powerlifting side of things because it's sort of seen as the less skillful, if you like?
For sure. I think a lot of people have to weigh the cost of, what is the investment to teach someone to snatch and a clean and jerk, and is it beneficial beyond being good at weightlifting? For athletes, especially, it really is like, I'm a weightlifting coach, but if I was coaching people in a university setting or something like that, and I could teach the lifts quickly, it wouldn't be a huge challenge for me to do it, but I just wouldn't see it as being super beneficial. Maybe we would do some kind of power cleans or something. If somebody has aptitude for it, or there's a group of people that can do it, yeah, we would use it and refine it. But for some people, it's a struggle. It's like, it's going to be too difficult from a mobility standpoint. They don't have the coordination, these things. And from an athletics standpoint, it's general in nature anyways. No matter what you do, in the weight room, it's never going to be specific to the sport. No matter how much you justify it and rationalize it. Oh, it's, where it's like the snatch is going to transfer to this or that. It just won't. It's general in nature. So if we're doing stuff that's general in nature, let's do stuff that's, one, most effective for our time, because those things are always going to be the bigger considerations, managing athletes and time and safety. And so it's like, yeah, I think people shy away from it for that reason, and justifiably so. It would be excessive to reinforce that you must use these exercises to be good at a sport. And there's a lot of justification that it is better, but there's very little evidence that would, suggest that it is that much better. So I can understand that, and I would say yes, most people shy away from it because of that, but I think it's justified.
With just touching on that, the skill point of it, where do you think that maybe both sports can learn from each other in developing skill? Because, like with anything, to get stronger, you've got to master the movements that you're working with. Yes, obviously weightlifting is a little bit more complex, and obviously in powerlifting there's maybe tempo squats or other variations that you can use on there. What do you find that maybe both sports can learn from each other in terms of being able to refine that skill and build that base to then get stronger?
Yeah, I think that that powerlifting can learn from weightlifting I would say that powerlifting 10 years ago was way further behind than weightlifting was.
Yeah.
I would say that powerlifting can learn from weightlifting just the emphasis on technical development. And I think they actually have a lot. I think powerlifting is way more advanced than it was. It may have even surpassed weightlifting on some levels, in that at the high level, powerlifting is a lot more, it's become way more technically focused. It's become way more, methodical in its approach, where before it was much more like, a little more random and this and that. I also think that the powerlifting specificity could be higher in some groups. Some people just, the West Side stuff is obviously a good example where that's kind of falls short. But it's definitely, powerlifting's already made that shift, I think. Weightlifting could learn from powerlifting, I think, a lot more about programming structure and methodology and creating methodology behind their systems. People don't apply principle-based approaches to weightlifting as much as they do in powerlifting, I think, probably because there's just not as much literature for it in weightlifting. And it's also like weightlifting, the coaching in weightlifting generally falls to like, people consider it a lot of an art.
Yeah.
So the coaches take it upon themselves to be more of like shoot from the hip, and because the sport is a little bit more, there's more variables moving. I think they don't try to hammer down as many consistency or consistent rules and stuff as they do in powerlifting, where there's one thing you're training in powerlifting. It's force production. Technique is a byproduct of practice, and then the rest is just force production. It's just, you have to get stronger, build bigger muscles, make them stronger. Weightlifting has, multiple pieces. There's a psychological component as well. So the art form argument sorts of takes over that. And a lot of programs are just kind of written based on feel and intuition, not necessarily on methodology as much. And that's changing more as time goes on, I would say. Definitely been changing that way, but I would say that's something they could definitely draw from powerlifting.
Yeah, it's an interesting point that you mentioned there in terms of how powerlifting is perceived a little bit. There is definitely, especially like what you mentioned at the top level, it's almost how the top level athletes carry themselves is almost professional. Like they're how they put themselves across, and the training and everything in the background. Obviously, before you would probably say that weightlifting were the slicker engines, if you like. Everything fine tuned, and how they prepared themselves. Whereas probably a couple of years ago, powerlifting was more sort of, right, let's just get this weight up. Bother about it a little bit more. But yeah, it's I can 100% see how the explanation that you've put there. With the sort of the challenges with both sports, what have you found to be the biggest challenges in again having a foot in both camp, whether that be from a programming side of things, or because like what you mentioned, the powerlifting side of things can be a steady growth and you can start seeing a little bit more, whereas because there is such a technical and a skill aspect of weightlifting, it might be quite a lot of work for maybe a 2.5 PB or something like that. What have you found to be the challenges?
I think the biggest challenges are the details, right? Powerlifting and weightlifting are very detail-heavy kind of sports, and the process is very detailed. And it's a matter of like, this is what I think that a lot of people don't understand is that, and there's probably a concept that's probably lost in our culture now, is the concept of craftsmanship. And you could hire, let's say you hire a carpenter to come in your house and fix something or build something, and any number of different people could come in and do the job and adequately get it done. But it could be your right angle might not be 90 degrees, there might be some gaps or some shit's not done right, or maybe when they're painting, there's some, it's not cut in perfectly and it's sloppy looking. So that stuff is all details. It's like the idea of measuring twice and cutting once, the idea of like, how much attention to the detail do you put into it? When you're writing a program, do you sit there and take an extra 15 minutes after writing the whole week and look it over and double check, hey, did I do everything the way I wanted it? Are these things calculated properly? Is this done right? And that's, I think, the biggest challenge is it's a tedious and time-consuming aspect of the training that needs to be put into place still. You've got to have this approach that you're a craftsman, that you're putting forth your best work every program. Are you really critically thinking about each aspect of it and then applying that process, right? It's not that a shitty carpenter doesn't know how to do things right. It's that they don't do it right. It's the execution. So it's like the biggest hurdle is always executing high quality craftsmanship with your programming and your coaching. Are you taking the time to think about the cues you're saying? Are you just basically refining your process and making it better? And that's always the biggest hurdle for me is, how can I do it better? How can I do a better job of these things? How can I, when somebody looks at, the product I've produced, which is the athlete, do they say, yeah, wow, that person's technique is great, or that's pretty sloppy, like they're getting away with it because they're strong. It's one of those things that, like, that's probably the biggest hurdle, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it, because I think sometimes, on that example of powerlifting being a little bit more professional now, but probably in the past, it's like, oh yeah, well, he's relatively strong anyway. He managed to lift the weight. He didn't get injured. Just build on there. But what the one of the quotes that I do quite like is, progress, not perfection. Yes, ideally, we're always sort of chasing the every rep to be the same and being as efficient as we can, which you want people to be, but we also want, from a coach's point of view, is to keep them making progress. When I'm check-ins with my clients and watching their training footage, there's always things that I'm looking for, just to make sure that, right, shall we try this today? And a couple of times, obviously you mentioned about could we do this better, that better. Also having that mindset to make sure that you're thinking about those things, even in your warm-ups and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I think sometimes people sort of neglect that a little bit and just think, I'm not even doing my working sets, but it all matters. It all works together. Is that how you come across with your?
For sure. I think the biggest shift for me from a coaching perspective was the idea of goal orientation versus process orientation. And with goal orientation, you're focused on the outcome of what you've done, right? So point A to point Z is all that matters. It doesn't matter how you got there, right? What is the outcome of this of what I've done? Is it I wanted to lift a certain weight, or I wanted to win this thing, or whatever. It doesn't matter how I get there, only the outcome. And that's a really flawed way of approaching things. It just creates lots of problems, because you're always going to focus on selling, kind of sacrificing a sustainable, usable system for, progress or the outcome, versus a process orientation, which is the idea that if you do the little things well every time, or do them and focus on doing the things you have to do to get better, then the goal will occur at the end. The best analogy to understand this is, like, if you're going to build a brick wall, right? What's the most important aspect of that brick wall when it's done? It has to be straight, and it has to stand up on its own. And that doesn't come from, finishing it and then making it straight at the end, like just throwing a pile of bricks down and then straightening them out. It comes from the very first brick you lay down, and probably before that, it comes from how you flatten the ground and level it out, and then all you're doing is laying down one brick, and then making sure it's perfectly square and level and flat and everything, and then laying down another and doing the exact same process to that one. Is it square, and is it lined up with the last brick? And then the next brick, is it lined up? It's the exact same simple step-by-step process, just done 20,000 times. And if you do it and you make every brick square, they'll all be the right way. So your wall comes out perfect at the end. And that's the mentality you have to take as a coach and as an athlete in these sports, because it's built out of reps, single reps at a time. Yeah. So if you focus on, hey, every rep, I'm going to just apply this simple process of, when I'm doing a squat, I use this technique. I bend my knees, I sit back or sit down, whatever, and I stand up. And you just do that again and again and again for every rep of every set. And your focus is now shifted from, if I do lots of good squats, I'm going to be a good squatter. Not, I suck at squatting, I need to be good at squatting. How do I get to good at squatting? Your thought process is on everything that's not important, which is the result, not on the process, right? And so that's the biggest, that's the key to all of this, I think.
Yeah, I think that's because everyone, one of the best sort of images I've seen is where there's an athlete stood on a podium, and then underneath, sort of underground, there's all the little bricks that they've laid.
Right.
And I think that's one of the best sort of like cartoon or infographics that I've seen.
Yeah.
Because everyone always looks, and sometimes, you know, I even still do it now, where you see people make an awesome lift and get a PB.
Oh, for sure.
And it's like, wow, I wish, I want to go out and get a PB. Whereas actually, you know, it'll get to that point, but you still need to follow that process. And like you say, you know, when you're building that brick wall, you've got to go through the process of it, which for probably everyone listening, it's not the most sexiest of answers, if you like.
No, it's not.
But, you know, when you look at the successful athletes, like you mentioned a couple of the juggernaut athletes there that you know, you've worked with, they've gone through that process to get to that point. And you know, it is important that it doesn't matter whatever level you're at. It's all in the detail and following that process.
Yeah.
And from there, you know, the PBs will come. Go on, sorry.
Oh, no, I think that's also one thing that probably creates there's this common, like, I see it, this common sort of life cycle of people in these sports where they get into the sport, and these sports attract people that have a very extreme personality, which it's, you know, it's very obsessive. It's very like, you know, all this, all the time, all in. And then the second they're burned out, they're done. And, you know, you have this life cycle of the average power lifter or weightlifter is probably like less than 3 years. They get in and it's weightlifting, powerlifting, whatever it is, all day, every moment, every second, constant attention driven into this thing to the point that, you know, in powerlifting, you see it where they just get progress for a year and a half, then an injury, then a big change, then there's this struggle to get back, and maybe they come around, maybe they don't, and then eventually they kind of burn out and they leave. Or if there's no injury, they do 15 meets in 3 years and they're burned out and it's done. And a lot of that comes from not having that approach to the process, you know, having process orientation where, you know, one thing that's important to me for the athletes I work with is like, you should have something in your life outside of weightlifting or powerlifting that is your life, because this is not, you know, as much as people love the idea of it, it's a lifestyle, and this idea that like you're just 100% in it forever. That's, you know, the people that have been in these sports for their lives. And I know people, you know, Jim Schmidt's a weightlifting coach, you know, multiple Olympic coach, multiple Olympians. He's probably mid 70s and he's been coaching for, you know, 50 years. He has a life outside of weightlifting. I mean, it is his life, but, you know, there has to be more to things than just, it's always weightlifting and powerlifting. If you focus on the process, it gives you that reprieve from the idea of focusing entirely on the end result. So you're not anxious about what am I going to lift in 12 weeks? What am I going to lift in 9 weeks? You're focused on tomorrow. I'm going to go in, I'm going to do my work. I'm going to chip away at it and do the best I can. And then when I'm done, I'm moving on to the next part of my life, the next things in my day, and next things I have. That was one thing I noticed that was probably huge with the Bulgarian lifters when I lived with them was, it was like a job. And not the idea that it was like a job, it's drudgery and it's terrible. It's like a job. They go in, they do their work, and they focus on doing a good job. And then when the job is over, they walk away from it. I never saw any Bulgarian lifters obsess over weightlifting. They did it, they loved it, they enjoyed it, they did their work, they put their day in, they punched the clock, they go and do the rest of their day after that, you know. And I think that's something that's very different in the current climate of athletes, is that it's so all in right away. The burnout can be so great so fast. And that's something that, you know, kind of rids you of the experience of having a long career in the sport. It's, you know, be unfortunate to get in and be out in, 19 months or 22 months or something, when you could spend 20 years doing it and derive lots of pleasure and enjoyment from it for a huge part of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good point, because actually I had a conversation with a couple of other coaches, and obviously with lockdown in the UK and not everyone garage gyms or access stuff like that. Most people that only posted about powerlifting haven't posted anything. So it's kind of like, what's my identity? Whereas, and I've probably mentioned it to a couple of other people as well, but I don't have a squat rack at home. I don't have a garage gym. So my approach to training has changed a little bit. But you know, I want to get stronger in other movements as well. So one of the big things is, I really don't like single leg work. I've never liked it when I've had it in my program, but it's something that, you know, will reap rewards once I get back to the barbell work, that sort of stuff. And as well, like what you mentioned there about treating it like a job, it just makes you feel motivated and excited. To go and train. It's a little bit like I use the example as if you worked in a restaurant and ate in the same restaurant, you'd get fed up of it quite a lot. So sometimes I'll go and train in other gyms rather than the gym that I'm working about, because it means that I usually within the gym, for different squat racks and platforms, there's certain platforms that I'll squat on, certain ones that I'll bench on, and certain ones that I'll deadlift on. Plus, obviously, that's the environment that I'm working in. But sometimes it's like, well, I'm going to go to this gym and I'm going to have a different workout here. And right, my accessory stuff, I've got rows. Oh, well, there's other equipment that I can maybe use here. So it's actually something that makes it a little bit more enjoyed, rather than thinking, oh, I'm doing this again, or getting stressed out, like what you mentioned, getting stressed out and thinking about it because it's the only thing that there is. And yeah, I 100% agree. That's why when you mentioned that the coach there who's coached for quite a long time, you still want to enjoy it. And then with the clients that I work with, I don't just want them to do strength training or powerlifting or weightlifting for 12 weeks and then do a meet. I want them to do powerlifting, weightlifting, strength training, or an entire lifespan, you know, and keep progressing through there. Quite a lot of topics that we touched on there, and a nice little comparison between both sports. For everyone listening, and for all the topics that we've chatted about there, what would be your take-home points or words of wisdom?
I would say the key to being really great at any of this stuff is to give yourself the opportunity to do it for your whole life. And to participate for your whole life, you need to have a principle-based approach that is oriented toward the process, not the outcome.
Nice. A nice little summary there. And for everyone listening who might have any questions on the topics that we've covered, or want to have a look at the work and the coaching that you do, where can people find you or reach out to you?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram, Max_Aita, Facebook. You can also email me, max@jtsstrength.com, if you're interested in coaching, or you can just go to jtsstrength.com and check out all the ebooks, the programming options, one-on-one coaching, etc., that exists there.
Nice. Thanks a lot, Max, for taking the time to chat with me. Was really looking forward to sort of picking your brains and chatting with you. So really glad and thankful that you took the time to jump on the podcast. Thanks a lot to everyone listening, and I will see you all next week.
Cool. Thank you.